Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Megan Lowry, and I am a Public Information Officer for the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. I would like to welcome everyone to the public comment session for the review of relevant literature regarding adverse events associated with vaccines. This study is sponsored by the Health Resources and Services Administration and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. For those of you not familiar with the U.S. National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, we are private, nonprofit institutions that provide independent, objective analysis and advice to the U.S. to solve complex problems and inform public policy decisions related to science, engineering, and medicine. I would like to remind everybody that this is an information gathering session. The committee is in the process of assembling materials that it will examine and discuss while developing its findings and conclusions. As with all National Academy studies, the committee's report will undergo external peer review before it is finalized. For more information on the National Academy study process and procedures, please visit our website, nationalacademies.org. Today, we will hear from members of the public who will comment on the committee's statement of task. That task is to review the epidemiological, clinical, and biological evidence regarding the relationship between COVID-19 vaccines and specific adverse events, and also between intramuscular administration of any vaccine and shoulder injuries. I want to note that this is an open on the record session. Interested individuals have been invited to attend as observers. For this public comment session, pre-registered public commenters will be called upon in alphabetical order. When your name is called, you will be asked to unmute. We had a lot of registrants, so we've had to limit the time allotted per person. Public commenters will see a timer on their screen to indicate how much time is remaining. You will have 3 minutes to make your comment. At the end of the 3 minutes, you will be muted and we will move on to the next person. The committee will not be responding to comments during today's meeting or taking questions. I will remind everyone that you can submit a written comment to the committee at any time by emailing vaccines@nas.edu, and that email address is also on your screen. Lastly, I want to note that per the Academy's anti-harassment policy, the National Academies are committed to the principles of diversity, inclusion, integrity, civility, and respect in all of our activities. We look to you to be a partner in this commitment by helping us to maintain a professional and cordial environment. All forms of discrimination, harassment, and bullying are prohibited in any Academy's activity. This policy applies to all participants in all settings and locations in which Academies' work and activities are conducted, including committee meetings, workshops, conferences, and other work functions where employees, volunteers, sponsors, vendors, or guests are present, including today's meeting. Anyone who engages in such behavior will be removed from the meeting immediately. You can read more about the Academy's anti-harassment policies on our website. We will begin with brief introductions by the committee, and we will start with the chair and then go in alphabetical order. So Dr. Isham, please begin.
Hello, I'm George Isham. I'm Senior Fellow at the Health Partners Institute and Chair of the committee.
Hello, I'm Ann Bass. I'm a rheumatologist at the Hospital for Special Surgery and Weill Cornell Medicine.
Hello, I'm Alicia Christie. I'm an obstetrician gynecologist, reproductive endocrinology, and infertility physician, and I will be retiring from the VA tomorrow.
Hi, my name is Delisa Fairweather. I'm a professor of medicine in the Department of Cardiovascular Medicine at Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville, Florida.
Hi, this is James Floyd. I'm an associate professor of medicine and epidemiology at the University of Washington.
Hi, my name is Eric Hegedus, and I am a professor and physical therapist for 31 years, treating individuals with musculoskeletal and sports injuries.
Hi, this is Chandy John. I am a pediatric infectious diseases doctor and researcher at Indiana University and Riley Hospital for Children.
Anyone?
Dr. Mayo Wilson?
Sorry, I was muted. This is Evan Mayo Wilson. I'm an associate professor of epidemiology at the UNC Gillings School of Global Public Health.
Hi, this is Tom Ortel. I am a hematologist at Duke University.
I'm Andy Stragachis. I'm a professor of pharmacy and public health at the University of Washington.
Hi, I'm Michelle Toledano. I'm a neurologist at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota.
Hi, I'm Robert Wallace. I'm in the departments of epidemiology and internal medicine at the University of Iowa.
Dr. Zerbo?
I am Husseini Zerbo. I am a research scientist, epidemiologist at the Vaccine Study Center at Kaiser Permanente, Northern California.
All right, thank you to the committee. We will now begin public comments going in alphabetical order. As a reminder, you will have 3 minutes. Our first presenter is Sean Barkavage. We are unmuting you. Please begin.
My name is Sean Barkovich. I'm a 53-year-old research nurse practitioner in New York City. Healthy with no prior medical history, I worked through the pandemic on drug and vaccine trials until I developed paresthesias after dose 1 of the Pfizer COVID vaccine. I worsened after dose 2 when a cascade of over 15 cardiac and neurological symptoms left me disabled. For reference, my case has been published in the journal Muscle and Nerve. My diagnoses include arrhythmias, small fiber neuropathy, severe tinnitus, hearing loss, and dysautonomia. Despite the temporal relationship between my symptoms and vaccination, it was often dismissed as coincidence and was not reported in VAERS. As a nurse and researcher, I was stunned at my colleagues' reluctance to report. In any other medical scenario, we ask a patient without hesitation any new drugs and consider it a possible cause, because temporal association is a strong association. Even when the vaccine was determined as the cause, medical records often documented me as post-COVID infection, despite the fact I never had COVID. Misdiagnosing COVID vaccine syndromes as long COVID is common, as the 2 conditions intriguingly mimic each other, possibly because there is far more research on the pathogenicity of COVID viral spike protein informing medicine, while there is total lack of research on vaccine spike as potentially pathogenic. Also, attributing causality to vaccines has become so taboo, leading to egregious misdiagnosing, skewing epidemiological data, and delaying proper care. Despite zero research on our AEs and lack of recognition, there is an unprecedented number of reports in VAERS. There are also over 3,400 published articles describing a range of reactions, many of which are under review today. Additionally, the new mRNA vaccines with no long-term safety data in humans demands this committee think outside the box when considering the possible range of AEs. The European Union, with a more transparent pharmacovigilance, has already recognized tinnitus and paresthesia as adverse events, among others. In the US, a fear of vaccine hesitancy fuels an attitude of ultra-cautiousness about adverse events to a degree that is no longer scientific. We now have a burden of proof for demonstrating harm so high that virtually no amount of data can meet it. As a result, the CICP's rejection rate for claims nears 97%. If compensation schemes rely on your decisions, be expeditious, as we suffer amid financial ruin and total neglect. This committee's decision must not conclude that we are an acceptable human casualty and further suppress the injured and data for the so-called greater good. We did what our government asked, mandated to accept 100% risk, while government and manufacturers bear zero risk and have zero obligation to help. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Albert Benavides. We are unmuting you. Please begin. Albert Benavides. All right, we will come back to him later on if he's able to join. Our next presenter is going to be Jennifer Bender. We are unmuting you. Please begin.
Hi, I'm a 58-year-old woman who received the J&J vaccine in April of 2021. And I had what I can only describe as a Guillain-Barré-like response. It was hard to diagnosed with searing orthopedic nerve pain for about 10 months without a lot of answers. I did not have the respiratory problems that typically go along with the Guillain-Barré, and I have some leftover, what I can only attribute to the onset I can only attribute the onset to the J&J vaccine of some arthritis type of inflammation. And that's all I have to add. It's not that long. Okay.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Angie Bluford. We are unmuting you. Please begin.
Hi, I'm Angie Bluford, a 49-year-old senior revenue manager and mom of two, and I want to smile again. In 2021, I was at the best shape of my life and rarely sat still. I enjoyed kickboxing, playing with power tools, and had fun no matter where I went. On April 15th of 2021, I gladly took my second Moderna vaccine to protect my family, friends, community. Life has not been the same since. I'm currently on my second leave of absence from work due to migraines, cognitive issues, and fatigue that continues to progress. Sitting in a quiet, dark room is where I find the most relief, but this is no way to live. I've been through numerous migraine medications and injections in efforts of relieving pain. However, I still struggle. My smile used to be natural, and now it's just forced. Managing my symptoms has affected my ability to be a great mom, wife, and employee. My body is a shell of what it once was, and my mind not far behind. Imagine waking up every day not knowing what your body can or cannot do, and it's all because you were doing the right thing. No words can articulate the physical and mental anguish endured in almost 2 years, yet I'm a lucky one. I'm alive. I'm fighting my fight with far more injured to ensure that no more lives are impacted or lost. Even though the CDC claims that the mRNA is broken down and discarded from the body, after a few days, I have tests showing the spike protein still present in my body 603 days after my last vaccine. In addition, antibody tests prove I've never had COVID. React-19 has collected 3,400 peer-reviewed case studies and reports related to adverse effects of vaccines. Prior to the meeting today, I forwarded this information and implore you to review the data, which includes 25 cases on headaches, as well as numerous cases on POTS and small fiber neuropathy in women under the age of receiving such diagnosis. We are in the infancy of research, and science is already showing the tie of the numerous symptoms in vaccines. Please hear, acknowledge, and help us. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Angelia DeSalle. We are unmuting you. Please begin.
My name is Angelia DeSalle. I am a member of the React-19, which is a researching organization made up of COVID vaccine injured. This group was started because we were desperately trying to find other cases similar to what had happened to us. We quickly learned that there was not enough scientific data supporting our injury, and our physicians were struggling to help treat us. We now have compiled over 3,400 peer-reviewed studies linking symptoms of the COVID vaccine, and I myself suffer from many of these symptoms. I was in great physical condition when I took my COVID vaccine on January the 5th, 2021. I started having a reaction within 2 hours, and by day 4, I was admitted into the hospital due to losing the use of my legs. At that time, when I presented to the ER, I had 11 different neurological symptoms and 8 non-neurological symptoms. Being in healthcare and trying to help my physicians figure out what had happened, we immediately came to realize there was not enough of published data for us to make an accurate diagnosis or guidelines to follow for testing. I suffer daily with tremors, muscle spasms, stiffness, small fiber neuropathy, POTS, chronic headaches, and hearing loss. I am still diagnosed with a blanket neurological disorder because there is not enough information given to support all of the symptoms that I live with. We are asking for research in the areas to be readily available and easy access by our physicians. Prior to my vaccine, I had not had COVID. Although many of my symptoms are similar to someone with long COVID, for me, it was the vaccine that caused the issues, and that is documented in my chart. Studies are being published in this area and clinics are opening for long COVID, but for us injured, we are still lacking the support and the doctors having the data available to them when someone presents with a multitude of symptoms. The area of research is greatly needed to prevent vaccine hesitancy and for knowledge for our providers to care and treat properly when someone may have an adverse reaction. I am now 26 months into this journey in desperate need of financial assistance, along with published literature and studies to help my medical community and my fellow injured friends. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Our next presenter is going to be Brian Dressen. We are unmuting you. Please begin.
My name is Dr. Brian Dressen. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. You have been tasked with the evaluation of available data and to decide if a causal link exists to the COVID vaccines. The available data is in its infancy. The scientific community cannot reasonably expect to have robust controlled studies for the next 10 to 15 years. Many say correlation is not causation, yet it should be cause for investigation. Many of the injuries you are evaluating are neurological and debilitating. 34% of those reports for the COVID vaccines are of the category nervous system disorder. Several neurological conditions were observed during the clinical trial phase: Bell's palsy, GBS, transverse myelitis, etc. PRR analysis of the VAERS system has identified more than 700 safety signals. More than 500 of those are stronger than the admitted myopericarditis signal. Your report will inform the vaccine injury table that will become the basis upon which HRSA will form their compensation decisions. To date, 96.4% of CICP COVID injury claims adjudicated are rejected, including injuries on your charge list. If it isn't on the table, it is rejected, plain and simple. I ask that you also consider dysautonomia, multisystem inflammatory syndrome, other inflammatory conditions, and neuropathy in your literature review. Kwan et al. In a large cohort study show an increased risk of dysautonomia, POTS, EDS, and MCAS following COVID vaccination, particularly in females. Wahid et al. Have shown a temporal link between COVID vaccination and disabling neuropathies. Yosaf et al. Of the CDC have reported cases of MIS in children following COVID vaccination. Over 3,400 case reports and series have been published in the literature about injuries believed to be due to the COVID vaccines. Most doctors have never and will never publish a case report. Those who do should be taken seriously. In the January 26 VRBPAC meeting, Dr. Shimabukuro acknowledged reports of a severe and debilitating complex illness following COVID vaccination. The German government has recognized this as post-COVID vaccine syndrome. Many similarities to long COVID are seen. The NIH in Safavi et al. Studied these injuries in early 2021 and noted similarities to long COVID and suggested similar mechanisms. No evidence of prior COVID infection, only vaccination. Post-COVID vaccine syndrome is disabling. I ask that you look deeper and consider emerging science and data. HRSA will use the absence of evidence as evidence of absence. These vaccines are too new, research not done, the science not settled. Those who did as they were told and were injured should not be abandoned. They deserve better. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Brianne Dressen. We are unmuting you. Please begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Brianne Dressen. I am a previously healthy mother of 2 young kids and a preschool teacher. I was so confident in the COVID vaccines that I enrolled in a clinical trial with AstraZeneca here in the United States. I received my one and only shot November 4th, 2020, and within an hour, my reaction began and has led to a severe and debilitating disease that I suffer with to this day. My disease has since been confirmed as a vaccine injury by the NIH with severe POTS, tinnitus, short-term memory loss, and I recently was positively diagnosed with CIDP. My life that once was filled with taking care of my beautiful kids, my husband, my family, has now been replaced with being confined to a body that feels like a prison 24/7. I now have medical expenses that total well over $190,000 per year for a medication that I will be dependent upon to live for the rest of my days. Now, this leads to our next point. In the AstraZeneca clinical trial report, my case is not reported. I reached out to the New England Journal of Medicine and requested a revision to the report. I was contacted by Eric Rubin, the chief editor of the journal, who then let me know that they would not be making any revisions, nor would they investigate further. Disappointed and confused as to what my participation in the scientific process truly meant, I then reached out to the NIH. The NIH did do a study, but sadly, even their robust and case series was only able to be put on a preprint server. This too was not able to make it into the published literature. I remain perplexed into my involvement in the scientific process, and this is why I plead with you today. I ask for you to please take an honest and unbiased look at the literature that exists. Please do your part and make sure that these people that are suffering are not discarded, that we are not erased, and we are not dismissed. The studies that currently exist are purely preliminary. The science will not be settled for another 10 to 15 years. This is where we cannot wait for 10 to 15 years to get medical and financial support that we need. We ask for you to take a long look at the approach to add these injuries to the vaccine injury table. Please ensure that these are not how the current CICP is set up. The current rejection rate through the CICP program is well over 96%, and this is not good enough for those who did their part. Please help us. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next presenter is going to be Nick Ferrara. We are unmuting you. Please go ahead and begin.
Hi, I'm here because I took the COVID Pfizer vaccine in 2021, and I have a spectrum of permanent neurological complications from it. I have problems with large fiber, small fiber, hands, arms, feet, skin, burning skin, brain issues, strength issues, numbness, vision, hearing, tachycardia, tinnitus constantly, dysautonomia, erythromelalgia, POTS. Of all of these issues, specifically, I want to bring up small fiber neuropathy because I don't see it listed on one of the considered items for VICP. Among the neurological complications from the COVID vaccines, small fiber neuropathy is very common. There's no visuals allowed here, so I'm just going to read a quick list of some of the articles that have been peer-reviewed and published on this subject. We have small fiber neuropathy as a complication of, you could look these up on Google, by the way, small fiber neuropathy as a complication of SARS-CoV-2 vaccination, post-COVID-19 vaccine small fiber neuropathy, post-COVID-19 small fiber neuropathy and tinnitus treated with plasma exchange, neuropathic symptoms with SARS-CoV-2 vaccination. This study was actually done at the NIH, which they started in early 2021, showing these complications as well as small fiber neuropathy documented. And there's not really much public talk about it, but they know that it's happening as well. And they made the Moderna vaccine, and they know that small fiber is happening. So small fiber neuropathy triggered by COVID-19 vaccination and associated with FGFR3 autoantibodies and improving during IVIG treatment, acute small fiber neuropathy after Oxford AstraZeneca vaccination, report of 3 cases. Small fiber neuropathy with long-term multifocal paresthesias after COVID-19 neuropathy associated with the Moderna SARS-CoV-2 vaccination. So these are just a couple of articles that have peer-reviewed and published this information on the subject that you could look up. I don't know how else to present this without just rambling it off all as audio, so you could look up the data yourself. Every country is having the same problem. The stuff I've cited is mostly American articles, but Italy, Germany, there's a lot of articles all over the place finding small fiber neuropathy. So all other vaccines are covered under the VICP. This one being excluded from any kind of help has directly caused a lot of death and suffering of people that I know personally that we've been going through this for the last 2 years, and a lot of them didn't make it. So in my personal case, I was able to get access to IVIG infusions for about a year. The billing to my insurance last year for this was $950,000. I'm lucky that I do have insurance. To get this covered and survive this over the last 2 years, I've sold my house of 15 years. Everything I have is gone so that I can survive this thing. And I'm better off than other people who are now dead from this. My friend Mike literally went to Switzerland and was euthanized for Pfizer vaccine disease. That's true. They are actually doing that right now in the year 2023. So this is how bad it is that we need help to get access to these medical problems that are continuing to deteriorate. You don't get better from these things. I'm lucky that I responded to the IVIG treatment and that I even had access to it. And a lot of people don't even get access to the testing because they can't afford it. So please consider adding small fiber neuropathy to this list, along with a lot of other things. But it's very common. All of the small fiber neuropathy forums or support groups that existed before are now flooded with vaccine injured people. So please take a look at this literature that has been out for the last 2 years now and is continuing to come out.
And also, I'd like to say that as far as someone mentioning a GBS-like.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Joseph Freeman. We are unmuting you. Please begin.
Hello. My name is Dr. Joseph Freeman. I'm the lead author of a paper titled Serious Adverse Events of Special Interest Following Messenger RNA COVID-19 Vaccination in Randomized Trials in Adults, published in the journal Vaccine. Our study analyzed the original Pfizer and Moderna RCTs and found an increased risk of serious adverse events and an increase in serious adverse events of special interests, serious AESIs. Examining all SAEs, or serious adverse events, in the Pfizer trial found a relative risk of 1.36, a risk difference of 18 serious adverse events per 10,000 participants. Confidence intervals did exclude the null. This is a number needed to harm of 555. The question isn't whether SAEs were increased in the trial or not. They were. This can be easily checked by counting the number of SAEs in the FDA briefing. Was it a type 1 error? A false positive? Probably not. Both vaccines increased the risk of serious AESIs, exactly the adverse events with theoretical potential to be causally associated with the vaccine. In addition, out of 22 AESI categories, 1 caused the largest risk increase in both trials. Yes, 1 out of both trials, further suggesting a type 1 error is unlikely. That one category was coagulation disorders. It's been stated real-world data is not consistent with our study findings. Is that true? Coagulation disorders? An FDA surveillance study identified an increased risk of coagulation disorders, including pulmonary embolism, myocardial infarction, disseminated intravascular coagulation, and immune thrombocytopenia. Then they identified these same SAEs again after the boosters. A CDC press statement identified an increased risk of ischemic stroke with another coagulation disorder. FDA and CDC, they claim that these are not confirmed, given that they've not been observed in every data set they've examined. It's true, coagulation disorders in many observational data find an increase and then others don't. The fact that not all observational studies identify increases is exactly what one would expect with a small increased risk, which occurred in the original trial if it was actually true. The data suggests it's clearly plausible the vaccines are causing a small increased risk in coagulation disorders. And these were only 1/3 of the risk difference in AESIs. And this suggests there was a small risk increase in multiple other SAEs. Individually, each SAE would be considered very rare, but multiple very rare SAEs together produce a rate of serious harm that's not rare.
Thank you. Our next presenter is going to be Eduardo Galli. We are unmuting you. Please begin.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Eduardo Galli, a biomedical engineer, physicist, and data analyst. In September 2021, at the age of 27, I received 1 dose of the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. In a matter of days, I went from training and playing multiple sports every day to not being able to climb 1 flight of stairs without having major symptoms. It was like I aged 60 years in 2 days. Given my scientific background, I immediately sought medical help. I've seen more than 10 doctors, including 3 different cardiologists. I've done every test under the sun, including 3 cardiac MRIs. The only things that resemble diagnosis are suspected myocarditis and suspected dysautonomia post-COVID vaccination. Today marks almost 20 months since the day my life changed, and still most of my symptoms persist. I'm here today to raise 3 important points to the committee. First, I'm part of the React-19 research team, and we have assembled a list that includes more than 3,400 publications regarding conditions caused by COVID-19 vaccination. We have shared this with you in written form, and we hope this list can complement what you currently have. It is important to note that the science is only in its infancy, and a lot more research needs to happen. Second, there is a significant underreporting. My case is one of many without definitive diagnosis that are not part of any published study. Diagnoses are very difficult to obtain since most of the medical tests currently available are not tuned for our conditions. Many of our symptoms resemble long COVID, even though most of us never had COVID when this all started. Third, many conditions that are clearly reported, both in the literature and in our surveys, are currently not present in the list that the committee will assess. It would be appropriate to add dysautonomia, POTS, and small fiber neuropathy, given the significant amount of people affected and the high level of disability that these conditions carry. I want to conclude by saying that after reading more than 2,000 publications on this topic, I can state that the science is all but settled. We have barely scraped the surface in terms of biological mechanisms behind the adverse reactions, and accurate epidemiology is lacking or limited. Your assessment of causality will affect the lives of many people that believed they were doing the right thing by getting vaccinated. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Renee Gentry. We are unmuting you. Please begin.
Good afternoon. I'm Professor Renee Gentry. I'm the director of the Vaccine Injury Litigation Clinic at the George Washington University Law School and a lawyer who has represented vaccine-injured clients in the VICP for more than 2 decades. I want to thank the committee for the opportunity to comment today. In reviewing the questions from your meeting last month, I was heartened to hear several members address the way this committee's reports are used in the vaccine program and how that evidence is viewed by HHS. In my 20+ years practicing in the vaccine court, I've seen many positive changes related to this committee's work, including new vaccines and injuries being added to the table. However, over the past 10 years, one change has had a devastating impact on the effectiveness of the VICP to uphold Congress's intent for this program. That change has been the aggressive delegitimization of all non-table vaccine injuries by HHS. The hard line drawn by HHS in contesting these cases, I believe, contravenes congressional intent, as well as the intent of this committee, and pushed the vaccine court further into the protracted litigation of the civil arena that Congress hoped to avoid. The stakeholders who created the program, including vaccine manufacturers, parents of vaccine-injured children, and the lawyers who represented them, intended for the VICP to be petitioner-friendly, informal, non-adversarial, and generous. The congressional record at the time recorded Congress's admonition that it was better to compensate someone who was not injured by the vaccine than to fail to compensate someone who was. This committee's comments on how its reports are to be used and not used reflects this same goal. I believe the VICP as it exists today would be unrecognizable to those original stakeholders. In some circumstances, HHS's unrelenting opposition to vaccine injuries using epidemiology discussed by this committee has resulted in the elimination of entire categories of injuries. In others, the virtual elimination of an entire covered vaccine, the HPV vaccine, where few, if any, injuries have been compensated since it was added. This is particularly dangerous when everyone fully expects new vaccines to be added in the future. What's been the result? The HPV vaccine cases are now opting out of the VICP after the 240-day mark to pursue civil suits against the manufacturer. There's at least one multi-district litigation on HPV cases that is moving forward. This is the exact thing Congress wanted to avoid. But HHS's hardline on injuries has the effect of delegitimizing all vaccine injuries into a zero-sum game. This is primarily being done through the use of the epidemiology this committee has reviewed, but I believe not in the way this committee intended. I will end with this. Vaccines are critically important to our national health policy. In order to guarantee a strong and successful universal immunization program, you must have a vibrant safety net for those rare individuals who are injured. A compensation program must be a reasonable and meaningful alternative to civil litigation, or it has failed. The use of epidemiological evidence in these cases is key to that, and I ask the committee to take these comments into consideration in their work. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Brian Hooker. We are unmuting you. Please begin.
My name is Dr. Brian Hooker. I currently serve as Chief Scientific Officer of Children's Health Defense, an organization committed to the best health for children worldwide. I hold a PhD in biochemical engineering and have devoted the past 22 years of my life researching and understanding vaccine adverse events and the associated long-term sequelae. I have little hope that this National Academies Committee of Experts will do anything but simply rubber stamp the safety of the COVID-19 vaccines that were recommended and even mandated to the population of the United States. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the agency that in part is paying for this committee to operate, cannot be trusted with science or medicine, and certainly not the health of the American public. This is the same CDC that discovered as early as February 19th, 2021, that mRNA vaccines were causing myocarditis in adolescent and young males just 10 weeks after the rollout of the first vaccines. However, CDC immunization safety officials, including Director Dr. Tom Shimokibura, hid this information until they made the tacit assertion over 3 months later on May 27th, 2021, that there might be a connection between vaccine and myocarditis. While CDC officials lied about this adverse event, the U.S. vaccination rate climbed from 8% to over 50%, increasing profit to the vaccine manufacturers who have fully captured this agency. Even the National Academy study director for this committee, Dr. Kathleen Stratton, has colluded with the CDC in the past to sway such committees to deny causation between vaccines and adverse events, while she worked with public health officials, including Dr. Marie McCormick, a committee chair, to withhold pertinent information for consideration by the committee. Specifically, in a 2001 closed-door session of the IOM Immunization Safety Review Committee, Dr. Stratton instructed the committee regarding the link between vaccines and autism, and I quote, "The point of no return, the line that we will not cross in public policy is to pull the vaccine, change the schedule. We wouldn't say compensate, we wouldn't say pull the vaccine, we wouldn't say stop the program." McCormick instructed the committee that, and I quote, "We are not coming down that autism is a true side effect." These instructions were given prior to any committee activities related to vaccines and autism, as the CDC told Stratton and McCormick to deny causation at all costs. These women dutifully followed CDC's criminal orders, and the committee rejected the vaccine autism connection in May 2004 based on a handful of ill-conceived, fraudulent epidemiological studies. Over 5,000 VICP cases were denied compensation based on this fraud. I call for the immediate removal of Stratton from any involvement in the current committee and an immediate.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Vijay Iyer. We are unmuting you. Please begin.
Hello, my name is Vijay Iyer, PhD. I'm a 46-year-old fellow from Chicago, currently living in Boston. I've worked at the intersection of neuroscience and technology for my whole career. In May of 2021, I had my second vaccination dose. For the next 10 days, I had mild flu-like fatigue. My case then followed a delayed onset pattern that I've been learning is common. I call it the 3 Rs: recover from the acute incident, resume normal activities, in my case, 2 6.5-minute mile pace runs in my local park, and then relapse, surprisingly later, into long-term illness within a few weeks or up to a couple of months later. Within 6 weeks, I lost my ability to sit upright, and I have been reclined most of the time ever since. Later that fall, I learned at my doctor's office that I met the criteria for a diagnosis called postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, POTS. At a later neurologist appointment, I learned the vaccine is a likely explanation, and my Serammune COVID study antibody epitope maps remain consistent today with vaccine-only exposure. Now, delayed onset is familiar to this committee from other post-vaccination sequelae, including Guillain-Barré syndrome. It's also, I should say, familiar enough that the NINDS director, Walter Koroshetz, described it with respect to long COVID last summer on Face the Nation. A pattern is really coming into view that vaccines can produce long-term adverse effects virtually identical to long-term post-viral sequelae. Now, patients like myself have been shocked and angered to learn that many of these long-term conditions like POTS have been sidelined by medicine for decades. POTS only got a proper ICD code in October 2022. That means we're playing catch-up on adverse events. Now, fortunately, the Cedars-Sinai system has POTS specialists, and they track EHRs at scale, over 200,000 during the pandemic. Their Kwan et al. 2022 Nature Cardiovascular Research Report is must-see data for you guys. In tables 1 and 2, you'll see with your own eyes temporal associations of POTS onset, both post-vax and post-virus, both. Now, the discussion gravitated to the relative frequencies of these two pathways, but let's get real. Those frequencies were on the same order of magnitude. The real problem, actually, is that these onset frequencies were 10 or 100 times that of myocarditis, which they tracked as a benchmark condition, and of course is named on this committee's list. Now, to my understanding, myocarditis most often resolves. I should point out that contrast, POTS is by and large chronic. Given the numbers and impacts of this scale, I truly hope your committee will speak to our representatives down the street on Constitution Ave. But here in the halls of science, I just hope to spark your curiosity with questions like what common mechanisms could be driving post-antigen sequelae like POTS? What's happening physiologically during these delayed onset windows? And could post-vax research even help to accelerate progress in solving long COVID, chronic long COVID? And thank you for the opportunity to comment today.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Christine Keefe. We are unmuting you. Please begin. Christine Keefe, if you'd like to unmute yourself and begin, you can go ahead.
Hello, my name is Christine. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to speak here today in an effort to bring information and awareness to the reality of what it means to be vaccine injured. I received my Moderna vaccines in April and May of 2021. I immediately started to suffer from multiple side effects: instant menopause, brain fog to the point where I could not make complete thoughts or sentences come out of my mouth, joint, bone, and muscle pain, massive weight loss, and the most severe side effect that has brought me here today, a nonstop racing heart. My first cardiac episode occurred in July of 2021. I had no idea what was happening to me, and oh boy, if I only knew what was in store for me. Here is where my medical journey of 2 of the longest years of my life began. My PCP did every scan, blood test, and workup possible. My blood work constantly showed severe elevated ferritin, C-reactive protein, and cardiac enzymes, plus massive systemic inflammation. Then there was cardiology. After having a cardiac MRI that showed my myocarditis, myocardial fibrosis, and trace pericardial effusion. I also had a Medtronic's loop monitor implanted, and after having tried 19 different beta blockers and heart medications, I was told I also had medication-resistant sinus tachycardia. At this point, I was ready to give up when I instead reached out to the director of cardiac electrophysiology at a very prestigious university who was willing to try to help me. In August of 2022, I was scheduled for a sinus node ablation, which failed. Then I was rescheduled again in January of 23 for an atrial ablation after my surgeon noted atrial tachycardia episodes. That failed due to a heart rate and blood pressure skyrocketing to numbers well over 200 while under general anesthesia, leading to my surgeon to believe I had tumors on my adrenal glands, aka phemochromotomas, sending me out the door for scans, more blood work, 2 24-hour urine catches, which showed no tumors. Finally, with no other options available and a heart that was completely out of control, I was then again scheduled on March 7, 2023 for an AV node ablation with a dual chamber pacemaker implantation under the chest muscle. I'm currently 3.5 weeks out of this surgery. That is for the most part a success. In closing, it was never my intention to voluntarily get this vaccination, but due to the fact that I worked for the federal government at the time, I was mandated to get it. Today, when I sit back and look at the 2 years of trauma I have endured, all I can say is this one vaccination literally cost me my heart. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, tell my story, and hopefully fight for the injured.
Thank you. Our next presenter is going to be Tiff Annie Kenny. We are unmuting you. Please begin.
Thank you. I'm a professor in the Faculty of Medicine at Laval University in Quebec, Canada, but today I'm addressing myself in my capacity as a patient who suffered disabling health issues secondary to COVID-19 vaccination in October of 2021. Symptoms that manifest at the onset of my menses about 9 days after vaccination as a previously healthy and very athletic female. What began as lightheadedness and a sensation that my brain was lacking oxygen escalated with rest. So the first time in my life that this has happened, to numbness, tingling, severe pain in the sternum and difficulty swallowing. I'd have to present to the ER 3 times before I'd be hospitalized in the cardiology unit on the 4th visit. But ultimately, it would take the intervention of my colleagues in the Faculty of Medicine, and several months later, before I would be oriented towards effective care from a cardiologist specialized in neurocardiological presentation. Ultimately, I was diagnosed with autoimmune thyroiditis, pericarditis, and dysautonomia, but still, I believe these are mere symptoms of a more systemic and disabling condition. I'd just like to highlight 3 key points here today. One is, and this has been highlighted by several of the other presenters, is that complex and invisible AEFIs tend to be a blind spot. The second is that we really need to center patients in this process rather than censor them. And the third is related to the statement of tasks of this task force to make conclusions regarding causality and the appropriateness and composition of the committee to rigorously achieve this goal. When I'm talking about the first point, complex and invisible AEFIs, we're talking about POTS, ME, CFS, chronic regional pain syndrome, functional neurological disorders. These are very difficult to diagnose and manage. There's overlaps with anxiety and panic disorders, and they tend to be psychologized. They disproportionately impact the female sex. They tend to be diagnoses of exclusion, which take years, if not more, to gain treatments for. There tends to be a lot of bias and stigma, and what this leads to is that delayed diagnosis, inappropriate treatments, medical mistrust, vaccine hesitancy, and ultimately poor pharmacovigilance data from which this committee will base its decision. With respect to the need to center and censor patients, in recent years, there's been a growing recognition that patients need to be involved in all aspects of healthcare, especially in conditions that are so poorly understood, and especially in the context of such a polarized climate on vaccines. Patients can be involved from study design to data collection and analysis, and I'd really invite the committee to consider a more patient-centered approach here. With respect to the statement of task and the committee composition itself, I note that the committee is comprised of 15 members, of which only 3 are women. And without wanting to suggest affirmative action or any shallow appointment of female colleagues, I invite the committee to consider what processes, policies, whether explicit or implicit, have resulted in this day and age to a committee that's comprised of so few women, or an issue that tends to disproportionately impact the female sex so much more. And with respect to the causality analysis, I also note that there is not a single expert on the committee that has very meaningful experience in causal inference. So I see these as important issues to address moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Jessica Krogmeyer. We are unmuting you. Please begin.
Good morning. Thank you for letting me speak today. My name is Jessica Krogmeyer. I am a BSN registered nurse and a registered respiratory therapist, and I'm injured from 1 Pfizer COVID vaccine, September 2021. I'm speaking today from the viewpoint of an injured patient. I've had many symptoms, too many to state here. I've seen several specialists and have been all over the country, including the best 2 hospitals in the USA, and none have had any definitive answers. I'm speaking to you today to emphasize the science for these injuries is still in its infancy. This is proven by my own experience in trying to get care post-shot. Despite having a negative nucleocapsid test at time of my injury, I have had a long-haul COVID diagnosis. I have had small fiber neuropathy, post-vaccine inflammatory syndrome, questionable POTS, questionable autoimmune sensory and autonomic ganglionopathy post-vaccine. However, there are academic articles emerging on COVID vaccine injuries. The science is so new and evolving that we likely won't have a broader understanding of the injuries for 10 to 15 years or more. This is why it is imperative that people who are suffering from injury are compensated now. These injuries have devastated many families and lives due to disability and financial hardship. I personally know some who have taken their own lives due to their injuries. According to an article in preprint by Safavi et al. Entitled Neuropathic Symptoms with SARS-CoV-2 Vaccination, the author studied 23 patients who all reported new neuropathic symptoms within a month of receiving the COVID vaccination. Of these participants, all of them had reported new onset paresthesias, over half reported palpitations, orthostasis, and heat intolerance. In this study, about half had autonomic testing with decreased sweating and POTS. In 16 of those participants, skin biopsy abnormalities were found, and in half, there were evidence for small fiber neuropathy. The authors concluded a multitude of neuropathic symptoms may appear post-COVID vaccination and may be immune-mediated. I think it is also important to note that the preprint article that I just mentioned was written in part by an NIH neuroimmunologist in addition to the other authors. In another recent article entitled Emergence of Post-COVID-19 Vaccine Autoimmune Diseases, a single center study published in March 2023 edition of Infection and Drug Resistance written by Al-Khattari et al., the authors found 31 cases of immune system-mediated disease post-COVID vaccination, and only 4 of them had a prior history of autoimmune disease. Al-Khattari et al. Concluded the average time from vaccination to new disease symptoms was 1 week. Out of 31 people studied, 7 were new onset vasculitis, 6 with new onset neurological disease, 4 were newly diagnosed with lupus, and 1 person with new Sjogren's diagnosis. As you can see, there are articles coming out of new case reports with small cohorts of individuals negatively affected by the COVID vaccination. However, due to no government recognition of injuries, there is little funding and or interest to study us injured. Due to these circumstances, only studying small groups of injured makes it hard to find all of the issues we injured are suffering from. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Jennifer Mackian. We are unmuting you. Please begin.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Mackian. I'm a 43-year-old formerly healthy woman, mother, and wife who is now disabled as a result of the Moderna COVID vaccine. In spring 2021, I and my husband, a neuroscientist and physician at UC San Diego, were eager to receive our COVID vaccines. Like most Americans, we saw the vaccine as the best way to protect ourselves and our family and a way to honor the social contract necessary to get through the pandemic. Following the second dose of the Moderna vaccine, I became bedbound for 5 days. Over the next several months, I experienced increasingly severe symptoms of dysautonomia, such as wild swings in heart rate, severe headaches, dizziness, and nausea, and a constant crushing fatigue. I struggled with daily tasks. Initial testing was inconclusive. Not understanding that something was fundamentally wrong, on a rare good day, I went for a quick jog. Shortly thereafter, my symptoms drastically worsened, and I was nearly bedbound for months, unable to perform my job as an attorney or care for my 2 young daughters. Since then, my family and I have been engaged in a lengthy and costly medical odyssey involving many specialist esoteric lab tests and experimental treatments. Despite the severity of my condition, I was frequently greeted with skepticism and disbelief by the medical establishment. Ultimately, physicians at UCSD and Stanford diagnosed me with ME/CFS, myalgic encephalomyelitis or chronic fatigue syndrome, as well as postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome or POTS. A recent article titled The Risk of POTS After COVID-19 Vaccination and SARS-CoV-2 Infection by Blitzstein and Fedorsky in the journal Nature Cardiovascular Research established the causal link between the COVID-19 vaccines and POTS. These debilitating vaccine-induced symptoms are likely to be lifelong. Patients with ME/CFS report lower quality of life than HIV patients. Despite the severity of this disease and the fact that it affects millions of Americans, a number that is expected to rise dramatically due to post-COVID syndromes, the pathobiology of this disease, as well as POTS, remains largely unknown. Basic research into ME/CFS and POTS has been majorly underfunded by NIH, and no treatments exist that can alter the core disease processes. This nightmare will likely never end for me, just like it won't end for millions of other affected Americans. The life I had before I was vaccinated has been taken from me, my careers, my hobbies, my social life, my identity. I live in constant fear of overexertion, which could worsen my symptoms possibly permanently. I implore you, please encourage your institutions, colleagues, and funding agencies to study people like me. Please examine the literature on POTS and ME/CFS. These conditions are commonly known to be triggered by vaccines. To be clear, I strongly believe in the science behind vaccination from the standpoint of public health, but modern medicine owes it to the public to do everything it can to prevent vaccine-related adverse events in susceptible individuals and to relentlessly explore the causal mechanisms to develop rational, effective therapeutics for these patients. Thank you for listening to my story.
Thank you. Our next presenter is going to be Mallory Marder. We are unmuting you. Please begin.
My name is Mallory Marder. I'm 52 years old. My late father, Dr. Victor Marder, was a giant in his field of hematology and research. He began his career at NIH. I grew up in a medical family and I hold an immense respect for doctors. I never considered not getting vaccinated. I trusted what I was told that the vaccines were safe. I wanted to actively help in ending the pandemic. After my first Pfizer shot on March 6, 2021, I experienced 10 days of vertigo, brain fog, weakness of my limbs, metallic taste in my mouth, and an initial fever. I went to see my previous primary care, who told me to get the second shot since I was feeling a bit better. I'm a divorced mother and live full-time with my 2 children. I felt I needed to be brave, and I listened to my doctor. Unfortunately, my second Pfizer shot on March 27, 2021 was drastically worse. and I'm not yet fully recovered. What happened was the darkest, most terrifying odyssey of my life. I was overwhelmed with vertigo, imbalance, ringing in my ears, weakness in my limbs, crushing fatigue, disorientation, and a brain fog so thick I could not read or write my name. I lost hearing in my left ear and was prescribed a hearing aid. It felt like I had been poisoned, like I was on a horrific drug. The only comparison I have was when I was 30, I fell through a trapdoor in the pitch dark 9 feet to a concrete floor. It took me 6 months to recover from my concussion. This has been far worse. It's 2 years now, and I'm still sick with what my doctors describe as a post-vaccine encephalopathy. In my darkest initial moments, I thought I would have to kill myself because I could no longer care for myself or my children. Under the weight of overwhelming mounting medical expenses and still unable to fully function, my children and I moved in with my mother. I'm currently under the care of a neurologist, hematologist, rheumatologist, and immunologist. I am better than I initially was, but I am no longer the same vibrant person, healthy person I was. I'm part of a much larger group of injured people, untold numbers, who are struggling to get help. The conversation has become so politicized and controlled, there's been a blackout on the subject of the vaccine injured. There needs to be research and free discourse. The COVID-19 vaccine I received, by every account of my doctors, has gravely injured me. Not only should there be a governmental acknowledgement that these injuries have occurred and a federal agency working on a cure or remedy, COVID mRNA vaccine injured should be able to plead their cases to the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. Please help us. The government must act. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Peter McCullough. We are unmuting you. Please begin.
I'm Dr. Peter McCullough, internal medicine, cardiology, and epidemiology in Dallas, Texas. On December 7th, 2022, in the U.S. Senate special panel on COVID-19 vaccination, I called for all COVID-19 vaccines to be removed from the market, because they are not safe for human use. And the reason why I made that call, and it was agreed upon by the panelists, was that Pfizer reported 1,223 deaths that occurred in their 90-day mandatory post-marketing data. The U.S. FDA attempted to block release of that Pfizer dossier when under court order for 55 years. The data was released for public review and is now widely disseminated. At about 50 deaths, no more than that, Pfizer should have voluntarily withdrawn their product. The FDA should have encouraged Pfizer to withdraw their product. Moderna and Johnson & Johnson should have either never been released or have been promptly removed from the market. As we sit here today, studies from Pantazatos, from Skidmore, and estimates from the U.S. CDC VAERS system using an accepted underreporting multiplier indicate over 500,000 Americans may have died from the vaccine. Autopsy studies from Schwab, Chavez, Morse, Gill, and Choi have concluded the vaccines are the proximate cause of death. The non-fatal syndromes of myocarditis, neurologic injury, venous thromboembolism, and immune system disorders are disabling. The vaccines have failed to stop COVID-19. No prospective double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trial has demonstrated reductions in hospitalization death as a primary or secondary endpoint. No valid observational studies have demonstrated reductions in hospitalizations and death while controlling for important confounders such as early treatment and natural immunity or previous infection. So, ladies and gentlemen, I conclude that the National Academies should join in support for full withdrawal of COVID-19 vaccines from current use in the United States, and they begin a fair evaluation and compensation process for the large number of individuals who have suffered vaccine injuries, disabilities, and deaths. I'm Dr. Peter McCullough. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Our next presenter is going to be Meryl NAS. We are unmuting you. Please begin.
Hi, my name is Dr. Meryl NAS. I'm a scientific advisor to Children's Health Defense, Alliance for Human Research Protection, and the National Vaccine Information Center. I had a slide deck, which you're not allowing me to show. I hope the members are able to follow along. and I call your attention to FDA's benefit risk assessment in drug regulatory decision making, which states for a drug to be approved for marketing, FDA must determine that the drug is effective and that its expected benefits outweigh its potential risks to patients. In considering the efficacy of a drug, you have to consider the duration during which that drug may be effective. FDA only required that subjects be followed for a median of 2 to 3 months in the trials. My next 5 slides, show efficacy over time for the COVID vaccines. The first is a CDC slide, then one from the Lancet this month. Third is Dorabilla's slide in the JAMA last year, then a New England Journal slide, and then a military data slide for over 65s. The first 3 all show that in adults, efficacy wanes to 0 by 6 to 7 months. In children 5 to 11 who get 1/3 the dose, efficacy waned to 0 in 6 weeks and went negative thereafter. If you look at slide 8, you will find the pre-specified diagnoses that FDA promised to do special surveillance for prior to the rollout of the vaccines. And you will note that most of these diagnoses actually did turn out to occur at higher rates in the vaccinated, but FDA has not made that clear and basically covered up that information. Slides 9 and 10 are official slides that show rates of myocarditis in young men in the immediate post-vaccine period after dose 2 were somewhere roughly 40 to 100 times higher than would be otherwise expected. Slide 11 is a very important paper in JAMA Cardiology, which had everybody in Scandinavia who was vaccinated, 23 million people. They looked at rates of myocarditis by age and gender and vaccine and the combination of vaccines. It turned out that if you had a mixed vaccination, so if you started with Pfizer and went to Moderna, you actually had considerably more myocarditis than if you had taken.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Gordon Polaboy. We are unmuting you. Please begin.
My name is Gordon Polaboy. I have been a cell and developmental biologist and molecular geneticist for 27 years. In 2021, institutional vaccine mandates were added as a condition of my employment. Previous to that, I had been aware in the literature and media of adverse reactions of multiple types and severity. I also had concerns about the lack of a longitudinal safety profile of the novel mRNA vaccines. However, I could not afford to lose my job and was coerced to take one of the mRNA vaccines. In September 2021, I suffered an adverse reaction to Moderna after my second dose. Originally, I had been misdiagnosed with functional neurological disorder. None of the neurologists did testing that would rule out small fiber neuropathy or dysautonomia, despite my presenting of case reports and publications that supported an alternative diagnosis. I independently sought a second opinion and was subsequently diagnosed with vaccine-causal CIDP, small fiber neuropathy, and dysautonomia. The incorrect diagnosis and lack of a meaningful engagement with my care team led to a period of 1.5 years in which my progressive neurological disorders were not treated. As I navigated the process of seeking treatment and official recognition of my injury, it became apparent to me that there was a disconnect between pharmacovigilance and reality. What was being reported through official channels such as VAERS and in publications were not being reviewed by the relevant stakeholders. As a result, care providers such as family physicians and the referred specialists like neurologists and cardiologists were not made aware of the importance of clinical presentation of their patients. This has led to many adverse events being misdiagnosed and not treated, often when early intervention would have led to improved patient outcome. The additional adverse event outcomes under consideration by this committee are an important step towards improved patient care. However, the list lacks adverse events which are biologically coincident and are represented in the adverse event reports at least as frequent or at higher frequency than what is being considered. This suggests that the pharmacovigilance workflow is not reflecting verified patient reports, thus missing the scope of the adverse events. For example, while CIDP is being considered, small fiber neuropathy is not. Small fiber neuropathy frequently is objectively found with CIDP and is caused by it. Another frequent adverse event that is objectively tested is dysautonomia. However, it is not on the list being considered this week either. Small fiber neuropathy is also coincident with dysautonomia. Both dysautonomia and small fiber neuropathy can be diagnosed without subjective testing and are occurring with at least equivalent frequency to CIDP. This suggests that the existing framework of reporting and scope of likely important adverse events are not fit to task. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Kathleen Roy-Dwelly. We are unmuting you. Please begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Kathleen Roy-Dwelly. I'm a 59-year-old female post-menopause. I had my one and only Pfizer COVID shot on April 9th, 2021. And within 24 hours, I experienced a sore arm, which I expected, but also loss of balance. Over the next 2 weeks, I had fatigue, trouble understanding conversations, flu-like symptoms, and worsening balance. On April 28th, I called my PCP and told him what was going on. That morning, I had what I can best describe as stroke-like symptoms. I was confused. I couldn't understand. My vision was impaired. Everything became very, very difficult. I had vertigo, excessive sweating, hearing loss, tinnitus. At the hospital, they kept me for 2 days. They ran all kinds of tests, MRIs, CAT scans of my heart, my brain, blood tests, and the tests that they were able to run seemingly came back within normal. I had uncontrolled blood pressure, uncontrolled heart rate, palpitations, nystagmus, full-on attacks of my nervous system, inflammation throughout my body, burning and tingling in my feet. And all of this has been evolving. I've been diagnosed with small fiber neuropathy. I have cognitive decline, thyroid dysfunction, autonomic dysfunction, gastrointestinal issues, full body aches, pains, joint, muscle, headaches, twitching, exercise intolerance, extreme fatigue. My balance has impacted me where I fall. I've recently broken an ankle. Prior to the vaccine, I was fully employed, self-sufficient, working with some of the largest and most incredibly complex companies in the world. Now, I need help with daily activities. I have a hard time understanding what I read. My vision is so impacted that I can only read for about 15 to 20 minutes before the extreme headache comes on for the whole day. I feel like I function between 10 and 30% of my former performance. I'm no longer able to work. My employer terminated me in February of this year. I currently am on permanent disability through Social Security. And unless there is some research and additional treatments available.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Dana Schaefer. We are unmuting you. Please begin.
Hi, I'm a mom. On June 17th, 2021, our at the time healthy 15-year-old daughter was given her first Pfizer shot. Within 24 hours, a headache of 8 to 10 ensued. Within 5 days, she started having seizures, muscle and joint pains, eye blurriness. After several ER visits, she then went 8 days without a seizure. Trusting doctors that this wasn't from the shot, that's safe, she received her second Pfizer shot. Within 2 days, she started having seizures again, followed by a host of other problems. These were, but not limited to, fatigue, memory loss, hearing loss, ear pain, tinnitus, intense chest pain, muscle joint pain and cramping, menstrual irregularities, muscle cramping, her limbs would turn purple or red. She had pins, needles, and electric shock feeling, internal vibrations, a constant headache, has trouble focusing. She'd mix her letters and numbers, leg and feet twitches, stuttering, temperature intolerance, itching, tremors, abdominal pain. She bloats every time she eats, eye blurriness. She became paralyzed for 3 weeks, seizures, tics. Her skin would burn so bad that she would go into a fetal position and scream in pain. Her limbs would go stiff. A doctor raised her arm. It took 20 minutes for it to go down by itself. Bell's palsy face, body twitches, bloody noses, intense abdominal pain. Her hands and feet would curl. She had multiple skin allergies. I'm also injured from one Janssen shot. I struggle with intense sweating, headaches, skin rashes, allergies, bleeding issues, vein issues, shortness of breath, tinnitus, twitches, electrical shocking, tingling, numbness, muscle cramping and weakness, fatigue, internal vibrations. I struggle with extreme muscle, back, nerve, and joint pain. Between both of us, there has been 2 medical flights, 2 ambulance, and over 20 ER visits. Our physicians don't know what to do. We have been told we have run all the tests. We know it's a medical mystery. There's nothing I can do. I don't know how to help. My hands are tied. This is over my head. This has left us feeling lost, disposed of, and helpless. They are at a total loss as to what to try to confirm or refer. We tried to keep our community, our family safe by trying to do the right thing. Now I'm asking that you view this as though it is your family, and please do the right thing and help us. My daughter did attempt a suicide in December of 21. No child should have to go through this, and no family should. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Ya Simpson. We are unmuting you. Please begin.
Greetings. My name is Ya Simpson, aka Sister Ya, community epidemiologist. In full transparency, I have not taken any COVID vaccines due to natural immunity. What I'd like to talk about is to verifying CDC, as in, are they still the curators of this entire virus system? Are there other responsible parties that we should be talking to besides the one committee? We want to say that I talk about utilizing state and local surveillance systems like NAS, which I use here in Illinois. We want to look at quantitative data on vaccine uptick in use and offer other factors related to adverse events, such as reinfections, hospitalizations, and of course, as deaths has been noted earlier. I think that we should ascertain other epidemiological profile reports within various jurisdictions, outlining descriptive demographics for race, ethnicity, age, and geographies. I am asking this committee to please conduct a case study. Do the work to conduct the case study in all of virus entries, diseases, and infections. Of course, focusing on SARS-CoV-2 or SARS version 2, known as COVID-19. And maybe we can rank the other top infections. Compare those who have been vaccinated, boosted versus those who have not been vaccinated or boosted by demographics, as I previously outlined, race, ethnicity, age, and geography. Please note that mortality surveillance is always available to us, and I'm sure you know that, but look more deeply for disabilities from like Social Security, insurance, and possibly even the IRS aggregate reports. Other possible analysis should include empirical bias and calculations to account for estimate errors that we've been hearing all along, and long COVID diagnosis or misdiagnosis, injuries, whether they're mild, moderate, severe, excessive death ratios since COVID has been 2020 to 2022. In conclusion, I would like to say, please let's revamp the virus system completely from a passive reporting to an active surveillance reporting, case reporting for better accuracy. As my time has dwindled, I would be remiss to say my heart goes out to all those who have spoken before me, those that will be after me, who have been impacted so gravely that I did not know this. This is the type of information that should be frontline news, and hopefully this Academy will do the right thing by having us here, having us discuss it, and more importantly, making this a conversation naturally. Thank you so much for my time.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Aaron Siri. We are unmuting you. Please begin.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak for 3 minutes. My name is Aaron Siri. I'm an attorney. My law firm has over 30 professionals that deal pretty much exclusively with vaccine-related issues, including a very significant vaccine injury practice. That practice helps people who are injured by vaccine by filing claims in the Federal Court of Claims Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, which some of you might be familiar with. The reason we sue in the Federal Court of Claims and the reason we're suing the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services in those cases is that there is a federal law that prohibits suing pharmaceutical companies directly for those injuries. Similarly, with COVID-19 vaccine, you can't sue the manufacturers. You are suing effectively. You're filing a claim with the federal government, and the federal government is the one that is compensating you. In my experience, in the VICP and the CICP, the Institute of Medicine reports are incredibly consequential. They're not just scientific documents. They're documents that are going to be used by the federal government to fulfill their duty to fight against any claim of compensation. What you write in those reports, what you put in your report, are not there to, and not going to be put forth by the federal government to grant compensation, but will be there to create a ceiling to deny compensation. That is their duty in those programs. And they fight vigorously using Department of Justice attorneys against any claim of compensation. In the VICP and in the CICP, it just goes into a black box. Your task, as I understand it, is to review the medical literature, but understand that medical literature, pharmaceutical companies don't have an interest to conduct the studies, and neither does our federal health agencies. They have a clearance process, as you might know, for the CDC's MMWR that requires all studies to align with CDC policy. If you don't know that, please, it's important that you do know that. And that's why when you're looking at these causality questions, understand that when you find there is no support one way or another and you reach no conclusion, the federal health authorities, vaccinologists, immunologists, infectious disease specialists that we've deposed over and over, they will typically use the lack of evidence in these IOM reports as evidence of no harm. So please consider the personal testimonies of everybody you've heard today, as well as any other case reports, and please give them the due weight that they should. If you have no evidence and all you have is one really good case study or one case study, one testimony, that should suffice, lest you are going to leave people with no compensation. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Michael Stiras. We are unmuting you. Please begin.
How you doing? My name is Michael Stiers, and I've been suffering from my vaccine adverse reaction for the last 22 months. On April 16th, 2021, I received 1 dose of the Moderna COVID vaccine. The following day, all of my symptoms started, which include dizziness, confusion, disorientation, head pressure, eye pain, migraines, neck pain and stiffness, seizures, neuropathy from head to toe, muscle fistulations, muscle spasms, visual disturbances, sleep disturbances. I've been diagnosed with POTS. I have PVCs, tachycardia, post-exertional malaise, and I have lost 33 pounds from the start of the onset of symptoms. I've seen 10 different specialists. I've been to the hospital 15 times, being admitted twice. I've tried multiple treatments, all experimental, which I have not found any relief. I'm currently, dealing with a couple of neurologists that are trying to do workups for a possible CIDP diagnosis. And I've just recently been diagnosed with small fiber neuropathy. I was a very vibrant 38-year-old man. I just had a son. My wife is a personal trainer and a nutritionist. We're very healthy. We were very healthy before this. I got the COVID-19 vaccine to protect my family, myself, my loved ones. My dad was diagnosed with cancer, so I wanted to do the right thing and get the vaccination. And the next day, all of these symptoms started. I've lived in Los Angeles for the last 15 years. I've been in the film and music industry and was thriving. I was at the top of my game, and this knocked me for a loop, and I haven't been able to work for the last 21 months, pretty much. So I mean, we've had to leave Los Angeles. We've had to sell everything. I've had to sell most of my gear that I've had just to financially support my family. My wife is doing everything that she can to keep us afloat, but it's a daily struggle. I just urge you to understand that we are here. See us, hear us, just acknowledge that we exist. And I beg for some kind of research, some kind of possible treatment, possible studies, because we're left alone to fend for ourselves. If you look through our support groups, you will see that people are literally buying magic wands at some point because they're so desperate for some kind of help. So thank you for having us, and thank you for letting me speak today.
Thank you. Our next presenter is going to be Wendy White. We are unmuting you. Please begin. Wendy White, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and begin.
My name is Dr. Wendy White. I am a professor and researcher in nutritional science at a major public university. I'm speaking today as a private citizen in an effort to gain needed acknowledgement for the existence of vaccine injuries. On the Mayo Clinic Connect patient blog site, there are more than 200 pages of posts from patients reporting new or worsening peripheral neuropathy after the COVID vaccines. In March 2021, I was a healthy 62-year-old who walked 9 to 12 miles per week for exercise. Within 2 weeks of my first Pfizer vaccine, I developed muscle spasms in my feet. Because the symptom was not initially suspected to be neurological or vaccine related, I had a second Pfizer vaccine. By June, I developed pins and needles and loss of vibration sense in my feet. By August, my symptoms progressed to burning, nerve pain, and numbness that eventually could not be controlled by nerve medication or the opiates prescribed by an ER physician. The numbness progressed above my knees. I had ataxia and leg weakness. In September 2021, I took 3 months medical leave. In 30 years as a professor, this is the only leave I have taken. I could not sit at a desk or drive without a dramatic increase in the nerve pain and numbness in my feet and legs. 3 neurologists agreed that this positional intolerance was unusual in peripheral neuropathy. There is a report from MD Anderson that dorsal root ganglion neurons at the lumbar level express the ACE2 receptor and are a potential target for SARS-CoV-2 invasion of the peripheral nervous system. A potential mechanism for my symptoms, therefore, would be that the spike protein encoded by the vaccine provoked an anti-idiotype antibody attack on my dorsal root ganglion neurons. My initial EMG in August was essentially normal. 3 subsequent EMGs showed sensory and motor nerve damage, as well as demyelination. The rapid progression of peripheral neuropathy in an otherwise healthy person is consistent with a serious adverse reaction to the vaccine. At the time that my neurological symptoms were peaking, my ANA titer increased fourfold. Thus, my nerve damage appears to have been autoimmune mediated. My peripheral neurologist agreed that my case is consistent with an adverse reaction to the Pfizer vaccine. Since my symptoms peaked.
Thank you. Our next presenter is David Wiseman. We are unmuting you. You can go ahead and begin.
Hello, good afternoon. I am a PhD with a background in experimental pathology, pharmacy, and pharmacology. I led a research program at Johnson & Johnson when my duties included pharmacovigilance. I focus on fibrosis and pain, running my own company since 1996. I joined Dr. McCulloch on Senator Johnson's panel. These expedited and still experimental vaccines are the most complicated medical products ever deployed. Sequences remain undisclosed, and questions about the persistence of mRNA and spike have been evaded despite reports that they linger many months. The Moderna and likely Pfizer bivalents elicit up to 4 distinct spike proteins, including 2 novel heterotrimers with likely new toxicology. Despite meeting FDA's biologic definition of gene therapy products, these vaccines are excluded from the gene therapy guidance, with no public comment from FDA's gene therapy infectious disease vaccine labs. Concerns for autoimmune, neurological, hematological, and other diseases must remain on the table. We see cancerous signals in theirs. Theirs is underreported up to 14 times for myocarditis. FDA have ignored their own estimates for underreporting up to 36 times when dismissing the now threefold excess of death reports for COVID vaccines over all other vaccines for all years. I will provide to the committee our 17 submissions to FDA and CDC. PRR signal analysis is useful but limited. Using vaccination coverage, we found more accurate age-stratified normalized event ratios, up to 7 for GBS, 34 for serious events, 370 for coagulopathies, 98 for deaths, and 403 for myocardial infarction. Significant PRR ratios for events of interest are published in NIH-funded work. Kwan found elevations in POTS and other diagnoses. FDA's HARPAS, despite finding masking, also hinted at signals for events on your list. In their recent discussion of ischemic stroke, CDC and FDA claimed that they found a transient signal in VSD and nowhere else. And yet, in CDC's own FOIA disclosures, appeared significant PRR signals for ischemic stroke in theirs from last July. We obtained a similar result from an online PRR calculator funded by NIH. Most concerning are data including CDC's showing negative vaccine efficacy indicating immune suppression. The Cleveland Clinic study recently remarked that theirs was not the only one to find a possible association with more prior vaccine doses and higher risk of COVID. We have found from European data correlations between vaccination coverage and all-cause mortality. There is a time dependency critical to understand the effect of these vaccines, with mostly periods of detrimental associations punctuated by briefer periods of benefit. Your work must be open to scientific dialogue that is not just going through the motions, as we have seen with FDA and CDC. I welcome your further interaction. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Michael Zimmerman. We are unmuting you. Please begin.
National Academies Committee. I'm Michelle Zimmerman. I hold a PhD from University of Washington with a focus in neuroscience, and I'm a researcher, author, public speaker, and was highly active as an educator on my feet all day, and after hours enjoyed riding bikes, running, dancing, and lifting weights. Since February 2021, I began closely collaborating with epidemiologists, frontline medical professionals, and researchers, reading medical literature on the pandemic, and leading COVID-19 response plan for K-12 education, internationally recognized STEM school. As I've supported others, I offer my support to the committee as well. A novel virus required a novel vaccine, which needs novel approach to data collection and analysis. On March 14th, 2021, my life changed. I had no pre-vaccination conditions, but I've been fully medically disabled since brain and vision damage, among other medically documented conditions that began at the time of injection with anaphylaxis and rapidly progressed while being told on site, J&J has no adverse events without ingredients like mRNA vaccines. I was told to go home and sleep, where I was unresponsive and sustained 105-degree fever lasting 9 consecutive days. I was told the vaccine was doing what it was designed to do, despite loss of verbal speech, extreme pain that matched definitions and symptoms of cerebral venous thrombosis. Lack of education among the healthcare community resulted in lack of early intervention. I now meet criteria for permanent disability, hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy, vascular inflammation, loss of peripheral vision, not cleared to drive, return to work, or cardio, among others. Your task is daunting as a committee, but it has the chance to bring and bridge the gap between research and clinical practice to establish hope and help for others. Of critical note for the committee, limited and sporadic data collection and access to data post-market leads to inappropriate or lack of care and policymaking. Second, 2 years of extensive and specialized testing came at my own expense as insurance companies denied claims for medically necessary testing as a result of vaccination adverse reactions, stating that vaccination was not part of their pandemic response guidelines and doesn't need to be covered. During the first meeting, there was question whether attention should be paid to different vaccines. J&J has never been FDA approved, and doses were manufactured under unacceptable conditions by FDA standards. Post-market data is not being thoroughly collected and was discontinued from use. Third, Aaron Siri mentioned lack of coverage extends to government programs. This also includes for work-related injuries. My CICP case was included in the British Medical Journal. I've provided the committee with access to a selection of my medical records and peer-reviewed research for vaccination and offered to provide the over 300 pages of establishing causation that I already submitted to CICP October 1st, 2021. As a committee, you have the power to decrease conscientious hesitancy and restore trust that will help when something goes wrong. People who are injured from eye drops have the burden of proof not on them.
Thank you. Our next presenter is going to be Albert Benavides. We are unmuting you. Please begin.
Hi, my name is Albert Benavides, HMO claims auditor here in Silicon Valley, or at least I was until I refused to get the jab. But anyways, I now run a website called VAERSaware.com. And, studying VAERS and auditing VAERS, I realize that there's a great amount of obfuscation going on and throttling, a delay in publishing reports. But 30% of all of the COVID vaccine reports have an unknown age because the age is not populated. Yet I've found 350,000 of those reports where the age is clearly documented in the write-up. Of the 17,185 domestic deaths, 32% of those reports have an unknown state, like they can't even tell us what state it came from. That's incredible. That's obfuscation. The undercoding, there is at least 100,000 serious adverse events hiding in the lowest level, event level, none of the above, where no event level box is checked off. That is obfuscation. There is severe adverse events in that bucket, including death and cardiac arrest and pulmonary embolisms and myocarditis. There are thousands of death reports that have been held in the CDC FDA's possession for hundreds of days before publication. ID number 2554264 was held in their possession for 676 days before the public even got to see it. ID number 2519713 was held for 641 days. ID number 2439694 was held for 540 days. ID number 2500290 was held for 472 days, along with an additional 1,000 death reports that were held in VAERS possession for over 320 days before they published the report for the world to see. How can anybody do analysis on VAERS with all of that throttling going on? To date, there's at least 115,000 reports that have been held in possession for 90 days or over before publishing the reports. So I just appreciate your time. VAERSaware.com. VAERS does not publish all legitimate reports that they receive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. That concludes today's public comment session. Again, I will remind everyone that you are welcome to submit a public comment about this study in writing at any time by emailing vaccines@nas.edu. Thank you all very much for joining us today.